You're an embarrassment to me. Sign the papers and get out of my house by Friday. I'm done. Ethan Blake threw the divorce documents across the kitchen table, grabbed his wife's ceramic vase, the one she'd carried from across the ocean, and smashed it against the floor at her feet. Sophia Vance stood in the doorway laughing. Olivia Hart looked down at the shattered pieces on the tile. She did not cry. She did not flinch. She simply knelt, picked up the largest fragment, set it gently on the counter and said, "All right, Ethan." He had no idea he had just destroyed his entire future. Before we go any further, if you're watching this right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and stay with us until the very end. You will not want to miss what happens next. It started the way most catastrophes do, quietly and with complete confidence on the part of the person causing it. Ethan Blake had been married to Olivia Hart for 6 years. 6 years of early mornings and late nights. 6 years of her cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, sitting silently beside him at company dinners, where his colleagues' wives wore jewelry that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Olivia always wore the same pearl earrings, small, modest, real, though no one ever bothered to check. Nobody at Vanguard Global knew much about Ethan's wife. She didn't attend the galas. She didn't post on social media. She didn't carry designer bags or drop names at charity luncheons. She was in the polished and unforgiving world of Manhattan high finance, utterly invisible. And Ethan had come to see that invisibility as a problem. "You embarrass me," he had told her once 3 months before the papers hit the table. He'd said it the way someone mentions the weather casually without cruelty in his voice, which somehow made it worse. "I'm not saying you mean to, but when Marcus Chen's wife walked in wearing Chanel and you walked in wearing whatever that was, people notice Olivia, people talk." Olivia had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had turned back to the stove. "Okay, Ethan," she said. That was it. "Okay, Ethan." He had wanted a fight. He had wanted her to cry or argue or throw something, because then he could have felt justified in what he was already planning. Instead, she gave him 2 words and a turned back, and somehow that made him feel smaller than he'd expected to feel. He told himself it was because she didn't care, that she was passive, defeated, the kind of woman who simply accepted whatever happened to her because she didn't have the fire to fight back. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about almost everything when it came to Olivia Hart. But we'll get to that. The morning he slammed the divorce papers down was a Thursday, October. The city was doing that thing it does in fall, where the light turns amber and everything looks almost beautiful, even the parts that aren't. Ethan had come home from a night at Sophia Vance's penthouse on the Upper East Side, still wearing yesterday's shirt. His tie loosened his confidence sitting around him like expensive cologne. Sophia Vance was everything Ethan had decided he deserved. She was 32, striking in that sharp-edged way that makes people nervous, the daughter of a hedge fund manager who had taught her from birth that money was the only language worth speaking fluently. She wore her wealth the way other women wear lipstick deliberately, and always where people could see it. She had been circling Ethan Blake for 2 years, ever since he had been promoted to senior vice president at Vanguard Global, and she had told him flat out over champagne at a rooftop party in June, "You're going to be somebody, Ethan, but not with that wife." He had laughed then, a little uncomfortably. By October, he wasn't laughing. He was agreeing. Olivia. He said her name like it was an item on a to-do list. She was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee, her dark hair pulled back, wearing a pale blue cardigan that he suddenly found infuriating in its simplicity. "We need to talk." She turned. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that he could never quite figure out, a calm that wasn't passive, a stillness that wasn't emptiness, like looking at the surface of very deep water. "I know," she said. That stopped him. "You know what? I know what you're going to say." He set the papers on the table. "Then this should be easy." She looked down at the papers. She didn't reach for them. She just looked the way you look at something you've already made peace with a long time ago. "How long?" she asked. "How long what, Sophia Vance?" She said the name without venom, without trembling. Just said it the way you say the name of a city you've visited and didn't particularly enjoy. "How long has it been?" And Ethan's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to know the name. He hadn't expected that particular composure. "That doesn't matter." "It doesn't," she agreed. "You're right about that." He pulled out a chair and sat down, and for a moment he almost felt something. Almost. Look, Olivia, I'm not trying to be cruel, but we both know this hasn't been working for a long time. He searched for the word and landed on the one Sophia had given him. You're not built for this life. The dinners, the events, the expectations. You've never fit in, and honestly, I think you know that. I know a lot of things, she said. I want a clean split. The prenup covers everything. You get the agreed amount, you keep your personal belongings, and we both move on. He leaned back. Sophia is moving in this weekend. I think it would be better for everyone if you were gone before then. There was a silence that stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. This weekend, Olivia repeated. Friday at the latest. I'll have someone help you with boxes if you need it. She set her coffee cup down on the counter, very gently, and then she looked at him with that expression he could never read, and she said, "All right, Ethan, I'll be gone by Friday." He had expected tears. He had expected begging or at minimum negotiation. Her acceptance felt like a door closing in a way he didn't understand. "Good," he said, and he picked up his phone and called Sophia to tell her it was done. Olivia went upstairs and began to pack. She was very quiet about it. That was the thing people would remember later, how quiet she was through all of it. She didn't call her mother and cry. She didn't text her friends in a panic. She moved through the bedroom they had shared for 6 years with the efficiency of someone who had been mentally prepared for this moment for quite some time. She folded clothes. She wrapped the small framed photograph she kept on her side of the dresser, not of their wedding, but of a castle in the European countryside, a place Ethan had once asked her about, and she had told him was just something she'd found at a flea market. It was not something she had found at a flea market. She packed her journals, her specific leather document folio that she kept locked and that Ethan had never questioned because he was not at his core a curious man. She took the pearl earrings from the small jewelry box on the dresser and put them in her coat pocket. Then she stood in the center of the room and looked around once, and her expression was not grief exactly. It was something more like clarity. Downstairs, Ethan was already on a call with his assistant rearranging his schedule. Moving forward, that was his gift he could redirect without looking back. He'd always admired that about himself. On Wednesday evening, Sophia arrived early. She swept into the house with the energy of someone who has already mentally redecorated every room, wearing a coat that probably cost more than Olivia's entire wardrobe, carrying a small dog that she set down on the floor and watched trot across the kitchen tile with satisfaction. Olivia was in the living room, wrapping a small ceramic vase, a piece she'd brought from abroad, one she was particularly careful with. Sophia stopped in the doorway. "Oh," she said, "you're still here." "Until Friday," Olivia said without looking up. Sophia walked into the room with the particular confidence of someone who has decided that their presence is always the most important thing in any space. She looked around at the packed boxes, the bare shelves, the stripped-down quality of the room, and she gave a small, satisfied smile. "It's a little sad, isn't it?" Sophia said. 6 years and this is all you have to show for it. A few boxes. Olivia carefully set the vase in its wrapping. "Possessions are relative," she said, spoken like someone who doesn't have very many. Sophia picked up a small decorative book from the end table, one of the few things not yet packed, and flipped through it with disinterest before setting it back down slightly off-center in the way that was deliberate without being provable. "I'm going to redo this room first. The whole downstairs, actually. It feels very—" She wrinkled her nose, modest. "I hope you'll be happy here," Olivia said. Sophia laughed. It was the kind of laugh that is designed to diminish. "Oh, I will be. Ethan and I are going to have a beautiful life." She tilted her head. "You know he never talked about you at events, right? When people asked who he was married to, he'd just kind of change the subject." Olivia finally looked up. And there it was again, that look. That surface of deep water calm that Sophia, like Ethan, could not entirely account for. "I know," Olivia said simply. Sophia had wanted a reaction, a flinch at minimum, some evidence of damage. She didn't get it, and the not getting it made her feel a strange and unpleasant thing that she would not have been able to name. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. "Ethan," she called brightly, "come see what I'm thinking for the dining room." That night, Thursday, the night before she was to leave, Olivia sat at the small desk in the guest bedroom she'd relocated to and opened her leather document folio. She reviewed certain papers. She made certain notes. Then she picked up her phone and scrolled to a contact that had no name attached to it, just a small crowned insignia. She pressed call. The line connected on the second ring. Your Highness? The voice on the other end was formal, warm, and immediately deferential. We've been waiting for your word. It's time, Olivia said. Her voice, for the first time all week, lost its careful flatness. There was something underneath it now. Authority. Old authority. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. Contact the Arenthian embassy. I need the formal documentation prepared by morning, and tell Ambassador Leclerc I'll need a car at 7 a.m. Of course, Your Highness. Everything will be ready. Thank you, Henri. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the guest room, in the house that had been her home for 6 years. Then she closed the folio, set it in her bag, and went to sleep. She slept better than she had in months. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Ethan was already dressed for the office when Olivia came downstairs with her last bag. She had dressed simply, dark trousers, a charcoal coat, her pearl earrings. No drama, no red eyes. Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table in a silk robe drinking coffee from the good cups, already looking like she lived there. Ethan glanced up from his phone. You all set? Yes, Olivia said. I had the company handle the paperwork last night. You'll get the transfer by end of month. He was already looking back at his phone. Take care of yourself. She looked at him. She looked at Sophia, who gave a small wave over the rim of her coffee cup, a wave that was a dismissal dressed up as politeness. Goodbye, Ethan, Olivia said. She walked to the front door and opened it and stopped. On the street below, where a cab or maybe a rideshare might reasonably have been expected to wait, there were instead 2 black vehicles, not simply black cars, but the kind of black cars that don't exist in the civilian world, the kind with diplomatic plates and tinted windows that suggest an entire infrastructure of power operating just outside of view. 4 men in dark suits stood beside them, not drivers, security. The kind of security that has an earpiece in one ear and an entire protocol in their head. When the door opened and Olivia appeared at the top of the steps, they moved in immediate coordinated response. One of them, the one nearest the door, stepped forward and gave a small, precise bow. Your Highness, he said. The ambassador sends his regards. The car is ready. Ethan had followed Olivia to the door. Some instinct, maybe the particular quality of quiet that had fallen over the street, had made him look up from his phone. He stood in the doorway of his townhouse and stared. The security men were loading Olivia's bags into the car with an efficiency and deference that made no sense. People on the sidewalk had stopped walking. A woman walking her dog had stopped completely watching. What? Ethan started. What is this? Olivia descended the steps. She did not look back immediately. Olivia. His voice had gone strange. What is this? Who are these people? She paused at the bottom of the steps. She turned and looked up at him, and something in that reversal, her looking up at him from the street, him looking down from the doorway, had the disorienting quality of a photograph being held upside down. People who know who I am, she said. What does that mean? One of the security men had opened the car door. He was waiting with perfect patience for her to finish. Ethan came down 2 steps. Olivia, what is this, some kind of joke? Did you hire actors? Is this... He gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. Are you seriously doing some kind of dramatic... Goodbye, Ethan, she said again. She got in the car. The door closed. The vehicles pulled away from the curb with that particular smoothness that expensive armored things move with, and within moments, they had merged into the Manhattan morning traffic and were gone. Ethan stood on the steps of his townhouse in the October light and felt for the first time in a very long time an emotion he couldn't immediately classify. Behind him, Sophia appeared in the doorway. What was that? I don't know, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said in months. He stood there a moment longer. Then he told himself it was a stunt, a performance, the last act of a woman trying to save face on her way out. He'd seen stranger things in this city. He went inside. He had meetings. He had a future to get to. But something sat in the back of his mind for the rest of that day, a small, persistent unease, like a sound you can't quite identify but can't stop hearing. It would get louder. In the days that followed, Ethan threw himself into the preparations for what everyone at Vanguard Global was calling the deal of the decade. Vanguard had been negotiating for 18 months to secure a sovereign wealth partnership with a European financial entity, a partnership that would effectively triple Vanguard's international portfolio and cement Ethan's position at the top of the company's hierarchy. The deal was tied to a gala, a formal black tie event scheduled for 3 weeks from the day Olivia walked out the door, where the partnership would be announced and the initial documents signed. Ethan had worked for this deal. He had given years to it. He had sat in rooms with people who spoke 3 languages and owned more art than most museums, and he had been charming and smart and relentless, and he had gotten them to the edge of yes. He had no idea that the final signature he needed sat in the hands of someone he had just put out on the street. He had no idea in those first 2 weeks about any number of things. He didn't know that the European financial entity registered under a discretionary trust structure that obscured its ultimate beneficial ownership was controlled by the Duchy of Arenthia, a small but extraordinarily wealthy sovereign territory whose royal family had, through centuries of strategic alliances and an almost preternatural talent for financial preservation, accumulated assets that made most hedge funds look like neighborhood lemonade stands. He didn't know that the heir to the Arenthian throne had been living quietly in New York for 7 years, first as a graduate student studying international finance at Columbia, then as a woman who had, for complicated personal reasons that had everything to do with wanting to understand the world, without the weight of her title following her, chosen to live simply and plainly while completing the private project she had been sent here to complete. He didn't know that this heir had married him in year 2 of her 7 years initially, for reasons of practical. Cover a married woman living modestly attracted less attention than a single woman of means. And then, in the strange way that life refuses to behave like a plan, had found herself caring about him. Had found herself for a period of years hoping. He didn't know that the woman he'd told to be out by Friday was Her Royal Highness Olivia Isabel Marguerite de Arenthia, sole living heir to the Arenthian Sovereign Trust, and that the legitimate royal documentation confirming this identity had been filed that Friday morning with the Arenthian Embassy on Fifth Avenue, triggering a series of legal and financial notifications that would take approximately 3 weeks to fully percolate through the relevant institutional channels. He didn't know any of this because he had never been curious enough to ask. And in those 3 weeks, while Ethan finalized seating charts and had his tuxedo pressed, Olivia, or rather, Her Royal Highness, now formally reinstated to her full title and position, was doing something quiet and methodical and devastating. She was preparing to attend the gala, not as Ethan's ex-wife, as Arenthia's sovereign representative, as the person whose signature was the only one that could complete the deal that was supposed to make Ethan Blake's career. She sat in the residence the embassy had prepared for her, reviewing documents with her legal team, and she was not angry. That was the thing that surprised even Henri, her most trusted aide, who had known her since she was a child, running through the palace corridors. "You don't seem angry, Your Highness," he said one evening 3 days before the gala. She looked up from the papers. "I'm not." He was Henri, who was Belgian and therefore precise and therefore struggling with precision right now. "He was very unkind to you." "Yes," she agreed. "And you're not?" He gestured, searching. "What would anger accomplish, Henri?" she asked. He didn't have an answer for that. "I spent 6 years watching how he treats people he thinks are beneath him," she said. "I watched him dismiss waiters and talk over secretaries and tell a cab driver he was stupid for taking the wrong route. I watched what he is, and I stayed longer than I should have because I thought—" She paused, picked up her pen, set it down. "It doesn't matter what I thought. What matters now is what happens next." "And what happens next?" Henri asked. She picked up her pen again and signed the top document with the precise, unhurried signature of someone who has been signing official documents since they were old enough to understand what they mean. "He gets exactly what he deserves," she said. "Not more, not less." Henri nodded. He had worked for the Arenthian royal house for 31 years. He had seen powerful people destroyed by rage and smaller people elevated by patience. He had never seen anyone do what he suspected this woman was about to do with quite such complete and serene precision. He gathered the papers and went to prepare. 3 days. The gala was in 3 days. And Ethan Blake in his tailored apartment with his tailored new life was choosing a pocket square and thinking about his speech and had no idea, not even the faintest, most peripheral idea of what was coming. He would. Very soon he would. 3 weeks. That was all the time it took for Ethan Blake's world to begin cracking at the foundation. And the worst part was he didn't feel it happening. That's the nature of certain kinds of collapse. They don't announce themselves. They just quietly remove every support beam while you're busy admiring the view from the top floor. The Monday after Olivia left, Ethan walked into Vanguard Global like a man who had just shed a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He was sharper in meetings, louder at lunch. He told his colleague Marcus Chen over scotch at their usual table at the club that letting go of his marriage was the best decision he'd made in years. "She was holding me back," Ethan said, swirling his glass. "You know how it is. Some people they don't grow. They stay the same person they were the day you met them, and eventually you outgrow them." Marcus nodded slowly. He was a careful man, Marcus. He listened more than he talked, which was one of the reasons he had lasted 20 years in a business that chewed through people. "What do you know about her?" he asked. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean she's my wife? Was my wife?" "I mean her background, her family, where she's actually from." Ethan waved his hand. "Europe somewhere. She was vague about it. I always figured she was embarrassed. Small town, nothing family." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter now." Marcus looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his drink. "Probably not," he said. But something in his voice made Ethan feel the faint edge of something he couldn't name. He pushed it away. He had a gala to prepare for. The gala was 17 days out. The Vanguard team was in full preparation mode, venue confirmed at the Grand Meridian Hotel guest list, finalized at 340 names, and the international partnership announcement polished to a shine. Ethan had rehearsed his portion of the evening so many times he could deliver it in his sleep. He was going to stand at that podium and announce a deal that would change the trajectory of Vanguard Global, and everyone in that room would understand in that moment exactly who Ethan Blake was. Sophia had already picked out her gown. Emerald green, backless, the kind of dress that announces its wearer's arrival before the wearer does. She'd shown it to Ethan on a Tuesday evening, turning in front of the mirror in the bedroom that had been Olivia's, and he'd told her she looked incredible, and she had smiled the way she always smiled, with total satisfaction and no warmth. "We're going to own that room," she told him. "We already do," he said. They were wrong about that, but they wouldn't know it for 17 more days. On day 4, after Olivia's departure, the first small strange thing happened. Ethan was in his office on the 38th floor, reviewing preliminary documents for the gala partnership announcement, when his assistant Patricia appeared in the doorway with an expression that she was working very hard to keep neutral. "There's a communication from the Arenthian embassy," she said. "It came through the formal legal channel, not the standard business address." Ethan looked up. "The what embassy?" "Arenthian. It's a sovereign duchy in—" "I know what a duchy is, Patricia. Why are they contacting us through legal channels?" She set the envelope on his desk. It was heavy paper, cream-colored, with an official wax seal. He picked it up and turned it over. The seal depicted a crown above a stylized alpine crest. He had never seen it before. "Do you want me to have legal review it first?" Patricia asked. "No," he said. "I'll look at it." He opened it. The language inside was formal, in both English and French, and it took him a moment to parse it through the legal architecture. When he did, his brow furrowed. It was a notification, a formal advisory, that the beneficial ownership of the Arenthian Sovereign Discretionary Trust, the entity on the other side of Vanguard's 18-month negotiation, had undergone an ownership transition. The trust's controlling interest had been formally reinstated to its primary heir, effective immediately. There was a name. He read it. He read it again. He sat back in his chair. "Patricia," he said. His voice was carefully level. "Get me Thomas Reeves." Thomas Reeves was Vanguard's head of legal. He appeared in Ethan's office 11 minutes later, which was fast for Thomas, who was a deliberate man who did not generally move quickly unless something was genuinely on fire. Something was on fire. "You've seen the Arenthian communication," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "I have," Thomas said. He sat down across from Ethan and set his own copy of the document on the desk. "We received the same notification through our international legal liaison this morning." "The name on this document," Ethan said. "Olivia Isabel Marguerite d'Arenthia." "Yes, that's—" He stopped. He picked up the document. He set it down. "Thomas, my wife's name is Olivia Hart." "Was?" Thomas said quietly. "And Hart appears to have been her mother's surname used informally during her time in the States. Her full legal name, as registered with both the Arenthian government and the embassy here, is as listed." He paused. "Ethan, the woman you were married to is the sole heir to the Arenthian royal house." The silence in the office lasted exactly 4 seconds. Ethan counted them later in the strange way that the mind catalogs the moments just before impact. "That's not possible," he said. "I've had our team verify it through 3 independent channels this morning. The documentation is legitimate. The royal lineage is registered with the European Sovereignty Registry. The trust she controls, the trust we've been negotiating with for 18 months, is directly tied to her formal royal status." Thomas folded his hands on the desk. "She is for all practical purposes the deal, Ethan. She's the signature we need." Ethan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to Thomas for a long moment, looking out at the city. "She never told me," he said. "No." Thomas agreed. "She didn't. 7 years. 6 years of marriage. She never said a word." Thomas said nothing. There are moments in a man's professional life where the wisest thing to do is simply be present and say nothing, and Thomas Reeves had been doing this job long enough to recognize them. "Can we complete the deal without her direct involvement?" Ethan asked. He turned around. His face had gone through something and come out the other side, not calm exactly, but controlled, locked down. "Is there another representative, another authorized signatory on the trust?" "No," Thomas said. "She's the sole beneficial owner and the only authorized signatory. There's no proxy provision under the trust instrument." "Then we approach her, directly, through the embassy." "Ethan," Thomas hesitated. "Given the circumstances of the divorce—" "We approach her professionally," Ethan said. "Whatever happened personally is separate from business. She's a sophisticated party. She'll understand that." Thomas looked at him for a long moment. He was thinking something that he decided not to say. Instead, he said, "I'll have the team draft a formal outreach communication." "Do that," Ethan said. "Today." Thomas left. Ethan turned back to the window. His hands pressed flat against the glass were steady. He was good at that, at holding himself steady when things moved beneath him. He'd built a career on it, but his mind was doing something he couldn't entirely control. It was replaying things, small things. The way she'd said, "Okay, Ethan," when he criticized her at dinners. The way she'd packed without crying. The phone call she'd made the night before she left, he hadn't heard it, but he'd seen the light under the guest room door. The cars outside with the diplomatic plates. The way the security man had said, "Your Highness," with complete reflexive deference. "The way you say a word you've said 10,000 times." He thought about the ceramic vase he'd smashed on the floor. He thought about Sophia laughing in the doorway. He pressed his hand harder against the glass. The formal outreach communication went through the embassy on Thursday. By Friday, they had a response. It was polite brief and delivered through the embassy's legal office, rather than directly from Olivia herself, which told Ethan's team something about how this was going to go before they'd even read the content. The response confirmed that Her Royal Highness was aware of Vanguard's interest in completing the partnership. It noted that she would be attending the gala in her capacity as the Duchy's sovereign financial representative. It stated that all matters pertaining to the partnership agreement would be addressed at that time through the appropriate formal channels. It did not say yes. It did not say no. It said, "Wait." Ethan read the response twice. "She's making us wait," he said. Patricia, who was holding the paper, said nothing. "She knows we need this done before end of quarter. She knows exactly what she's doing." He set the paper down. "Fine, we wait." But waiting was not something Ethan did gracefully. He began doing what anxious people do when they can't control the thing that matters most. He over-controlled everything else. He rearranged the gala seating chart twice. He rewrote his speech 3 times. He called Marcus Chen at 9 in the evening to talk through scenarios. And Marcus listened and said careful, measured things that didn't actually reassure Ethan at all. "You need to think carefully about how you approach her at the gala," Marcus said. "If she's coming as a royal representative, there's a protocol. You can't just walk up to her like what?" Ethan said. "Like her ex-husband who threw her out of the house a week ago." The words landed flat and hard. Ethan didn't respond for a moment. "I didn't throw her out," he said. "It was a mutual—" "Ethan." Marcus's voice was quiet and even. "I'm your friend. So I'm going to say this once. I think you need to be very careful. Not just professionally. I think you need to think about what you actually know about this woman and whether you've been operating with incomplete information for a very long time." Ethan hung up shortly after that. He told himself Marcus was being dramatic. On day 9, Sophia found the embassy notification on Ethan's desk. He came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with the cream-colored document in her hand, reading it with the focused intensity of someone calculating something. She looked up when he walked in. "Is this real?" she said. "Yes. Your wife is a royal heir." "Was my wife." "Ethan." She set the paper down. Her voice had gone to a place he didn't love, that precise cold register she used when she was assessing risk. "This woman controls the trust. The trust is our deal. The deal is—" She stopped. "How did you not know this?" "I didn't ask," he said. "You didn't ask." She stared at him. "You were married to someone for 6 years, and you didn't know who she actually was." "She didn't tell me." "Did you ever try to find out?" He didn't answer, which was itself an answer. Sophia stood up. She picked up her wine glass and walked to the window, and he could see her thinking that quick mercenary calculation that was one of the things he'd found attractive about her and was now finding profoundly uncomfortable. "Okay," she said. "Okay, this is a problem, but it's not insurmountable. You need to get in front of her before the gala. Private meeting. Apologize if you have to. Get the signature." "I'm not going to grovel to my ex-wife for a business deal." Sophia turned. Her eyes were sharp. "Then lose the deal. Your choice." They stared at each other. "I'll handle it," he said. "See that you do." He lay awake that night listening to Sophia sleep with the easy, untroubled depth of someone whose conscience has always been optional equipment. He stared at the ceiling and tried to reconstruct 6 years of marriage from the far side of new information, and the picture that assembled itself was not one he liked. The way she'd always known things before he told her, the way she'd handled the household finances with a precision he'd attributed to frugality and now understood was something else entirely. The locked document folio, the phone calls she'd take in the other room, the trip she'd made to Europe in year 3 for what she'd called a family obligation, gone for 2 weeks back with no photographs, no stories, just that quiet steadiness and those pearl earrings. He thought about the way she'd looked at him over 6 years. Patient. Watchful, like she was waiting for something to either happen or fail to happen. He thought about the vase. He closed his eyes. On day 12, he made the call. He called the embassy directly, not through legal, not through Patricia, but himself on his personal phone at 7 in the morning while Sophia was still asleep. He asked to speak to whoever coordinated Her Royal Highness's schedule. He was put through to a man named Henri, who had a Belgian accent and a voice that was perfectly, infuriatingly polite. "I'd like to request a private meeting," Ethan said, "before the gala. Something informal. 15 minutes. "I'll convey your request to Her Royal Highness," Henri said. "Can you tell me, is she well?" He hadn't planned to ask that. It came out before he'd approved it. There was a brief pause on Henri's end. "She is very well, Mr. Blake. Thank you for asking." The call ended. Ethan sat with his phone in his hand in the early morning quiet of the kitchen, and for the first time since October, he felt something that wasn't anger or anxiety or ambition. He felt something small and cold and honest sitting at the center of his chest. He didn't know what to do with it. So he put on his suit and went to work. The response from Henri came back that afternoon. Her Royal Highness regretted that her schedule did not permit a private meeting prior to the gala. All matters pertaining to the partnership would be addressed at the appropriate time. All matters. That phrase covered a lot of ground. Ethan read it standing in the hallway outside his office, and then walked back inside and shut the door and sat very still for 3 full minutes, which was something he almost never did. Patricia knocked. "The overnight legal review of the partnership documents came back," she said through the door, and she opened the door. Her expression was doing the careful, neutral thing again, which he was starting to dread. "Thomas wants to see you. Now, if possible." He went. Thomas's office was at the end of the corridor, and it had the particular quality of stillness that spaces acquire when the person inside them has recently received difficult news and has had time to arrange themselves around it. Thomas was at his desk with 3 documents in front of him, and he looked up when Ethan entered with the expression of a man who has rehearsed the next 5 minutes several times and still isn't sure they're going to go well. "Sit down, Ethan." Ethan sat. The legal team reviewed the original partnership framework documents, the ones we negotiated and initialed 18 months ago. Thomas pressed his fingertips together. "There's a clause in the initial memorandum of understanding. It pertains to the authorized representative of the trust." He paused. When you signed the preliminary framework documents, you represented yourself as negotiating on behalf of a privately held entity unconnected to any existing sovereign agreements. That representation is standard practice. Right, Ethan said slowly. So the trust's legal structure carries a treaty-linked provision. It's a protection mechanism built into the trust instrument going back several generations. It states that any party entering into a significant financial agreement with the trust must have no material conflict of interest, personal, financial, or legal, with the trust's sovereign representative. Thomas picked up the top document. Ethan, your divorce filing is being treated under the trust's legal framework as a potential conflict of interest, specifically because certain marital financial representations you made during the divorce proceedings appear to contradict the structure of the trust. Ethan stared at him. What does that mean in plain language, Thomas? Thomas set the document down. It means that if the trust's legal team determines that you misrepresented your knowledge of the trust's existence or your relationship to its sovereign representative during either the marriage or the divorce proceedings, there's an argument that you are in breach of the preliminary framework agreement. He paused, which would expose Vanguard to significant legal liability and potentially expose you personally to a fraud determination under international commercial law. The silence this time lasted longer than 4 seconds. I didn't know, Ethan said. I genuinely did not know who she was. I believe you, Thomas said. But belief and legal proof are different things. And the question that a court or a treaty arbitration panel would ask is, what due diligence did you perform? What steps did you take to understand the identity and background of your own spouse? He looked at Ethan directly. In 6 years of marriage, Ethan, did you ever formally investigate her background? Ethan said nothing. Thomas nodded slowly. That's what I thought, he said. And that's the problem. Ethan drove home that night in the kind of mental state that sits just below panic. Not there yet, but close enough to feel it breathing on the back of his neck. The partnership, which 3 weeks ago had been the shining centerpiece of his career, was now a legal tripwire. His personal life, the divorce, the misrepresentations, the things he'd said on those documents about Olivia having no independent assets. No significant financial interests was being reviewed by people in Brussels and Bern who spoke in careful, devastating, complete sentences. Sophia was at the apartment when he arrived. She was on the phone with someone, her voice bright and animated the way it always was when she was performing for an audience. She held up one finger when she saw him, the universal gesture for wait, and kept talking. He went to the kitchen. He poured water. He stood at the counter. On the floor there was still a small fragment of ceramic that he hadn't noticed before, a piece of Olivia's vase that had slid under the edge of the cabinet the morning he'd smashed it. Small, pale blue, with a delicate painted edge that he now looked at closely for the first time. He picked it up. He stood there holding it, this small, broken piece of something he hadn't bothered to understand. Sophia came into the kitchen, still bright-voiced, already talking about the gala, about the dress, about which photographers would be there. He set the ceramic piece on the counter and turned to face her, and she must have seen something in his face because she stopped mid-sentence. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. He went to bed early. He lay in the dark, and he thought about 6 years, and about all the things a person can miss when they're too busy deciding what they already know. 5 days until the gala. 5 days until the woman he had thrown out of his own home would walk into the most important room of his professional life and determine the fate of everything he'd spent years building. And somewhere across the city, in the formal residence of the Arenthian embassy, Olivia, Her Royal Highness Grand Duchess Apparent of Arenthia, was sitting at a desk reviewing the final documents, signing the papers that would formalize her position, and choosing with great care and deliberate thought exactly what she was going to wear. 5 days became 4, 4 became 3, and with each passing day the atmosphere inside Vanguard Global shifted in the way that pressurized things shift just before they give, not with noise, but with a kind of total breathless stillness. Ethan felt it. He felt it in the way conversations stopped when he walked into rooms. He felt it in the way Patricia answered his questions with complete, careful accuracy and nothing extra. He felt it most acutely on the afternoon of day 3 before the gala, when Richard Holt, the CEO of Vanguard Global, a man who had shaken hands with 3 presidents and never once raised his voice, called Ethan into his office and closed the door. Richard Holt did not close his door for good news. He sat behind his desk, and he looked at Ethan with the expression of a man who has already made a decision and is now simply performing the courtesy of explanation. "Sit down, Ethan." Ethan sat. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." Richard folded his hands on the desk. "Did you know at any point during the 18 months of partnership negotiations with the Arenthian Trust that your wife was the trust's sovereign representative?" "No," Ethan said. "I had no idea." Richard studied him for a long moment. He was good at that, at the long, calibrated look that made people feel X-rayed. "Thomas has walked me through the legal exposure. I've had outside counsel review it independently. The consensus is that your personal misrepresentations in the divorce filing, specifically the declaration that your wife held no independent significant assets, create a direct evidentiary problem for our preliminary framework agreement." "I didn't know about the assets," Ethan said. "That's not a misrepresentation if I genuinely didn't know. That argument will take 18 months and considerable legal fees to make successfully," Richard said. "In the meantime, the gala is in 3 days. The partnership signing is scheduled for that evening, and the only person who can complete this deal is a woman you threw out of your home." He paused. "I'm not here to judge your personal decisions, Ethan, but I need to understand one thing clearly. Is there any possibility that Her Royal Highness will refuse to sign?" The silence sat between them. "I don't know," Ethan said. Richard nodded once, slowly. "That's what I was afraid of," he said. "Here's where we are. You will attend the gala. You will conduct yourself with absolute professionalism. You will not approach her as a former spouse. You will not make any personal appeals. Our legal and diplomatic team will handle the formal interactions." He picked up a pen and then set it down, a gesture that meant he was done. "And Ethan, if this deal collapses because of your personal situation, I want you to understand what that means for your position here." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ethan walked out of Richard Holt's office and stood in the corridor for a moment, and the feeling that moved through him was something he didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't quite shame. It wasn't quite fear. It was something that lived in the territory between the two, the feeling of a man beginning to understand the actual dimensions of a mistake he thought was already behind him. He went back to his office. He sat down. He looked at his phone. He wanted to call Olivia. He didn't. 2 days before the gala, Sophia threw the first grenade. She had been quiet for Sophia for most of the past week. That particular quiet that meant she was watching the numbers change and recalculating. On the evening of day 2 before the gala, she came home from lunch with 2 of her friends, and she was animated in a way that made Ethan's stomach tighten the moment she walked through the door. "People are talking," she said, dropping her bag on the chair, "about Olivia, about who she actually is. Catherine Mercer told me at lunch that the embassy put out a formal social announcement about her royal reinstatement last week, and half of New York society apparently already knows." "I'm aware," Ethan said. "Ethan," Sophia sat across from him. Her voice had that sharp precision now, that blade-edge quality. "People are putting together the timeline. She was your wife. You filed for divorce. And now she shows up as the signing authority on the biggest deal your company has ever attempted." She paused. "Do you understand how this looks?" "It looks like bad timing," he said. "It looks like you threw away a royal heir because you didn't bother to look," she said. "And now the whole city knows it." He looked at her. There was something different in her face tonight. Not concern exactly. Sophia did not really do concern. It was assessment. She was assessing him the way she assessed everything through the lens of what it was worth and what it cost. "Are we going to be all right?" she said. He understood what she was actually asking. She wasn't asking about them. She was asking about the deal, the money, the position, the world they had both decided they deserved. She was asking whether the investment she had made in Ethan Blake was going to pay off. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded and picked up her phone and moved on, because Sophia Vance had the remarkable ability to accept the answer she wanted and move forward without looking too closely at whether it was true. Ethan wasn't sure it was true. He wasn't sure of very many things anymore. The morning of the gala arrived the way important mornings always do, with complete indifference to the weight of what they carry. The city outside was clear and cold, one of those New York November days where the light has a particular crystalline quality, and everything looks sharper than it is. At the embassy on Fifth Avenue, Henri was overseeing the final preparations with the organized efficiency of a man who has managed royal events for 3 decades. The gown had been delivered at 6 a.m. midnight blue silk, structured and severe and extraordinarily elegant with a fitted bodice and a train that moved like water. The Arenthian diamond crest necklace had been brought from the embassy vault under security escort. It was a piece that had belonged to Olivia's grandmother, and to her grandmother's mother before that 3 generations of women who had understood that real power dressed itself carefully. Olivia sat in front of the mirror in the embassy's formal dressing suite while her stylist worked, and she was very still. Not tense still, the way she was always still when she had made a decision and moved past the point of second-guessing. Henri stood nearby going through the evening schedule on his tablet. Ambassador Leclerc will make the formal introduction at 9:15. The Vanguard legal team has been notified that the partnership review will take place at 10 in the East Drawing Room under formal diplomatic protocol. "And Ethan Blake," she said. Henri looked up. "He will be attending with Ms. Vance. He has been placed at table 7, per your instruction, not adjacent to the signing area." "Good." She watched her reflection for a moment. "Henri, what is the current legal status of the fraud review?" "Our attorneys have completed their preliminary analysis. The misrepresentations in the divorce filing are documented. Whether to formally pursue them is—" He paused carefully. "Entirely at your discretion, Your Highness." She held his gaze in the mirror. "I haven't decided yet." "Of course. What I have decided," she said, "is that I will not let anyone in that room tonight feel sorry for me. Not one person." Henri smiled, a small, genuine thing that was rare enough on his face to mean something. "Your Highness," he said, "I very much doubt anyone will." The Grand Meridian Hotel had been transformed for the occasion in the way that serious money transforms serious spaces, not with excess, but with precision. 340 guests moved through the receiving hall, every one of them representing something significant in the world of international finance, diplomacy, or business. Ethan arrived at 7:30 with Sophia on his arm. She was magnificent in the emerald dress that was simply true, and he registered it the way you register facts. She moved through the room with total confidence, and he matched her pace, and from the outside they looked like exactly what they were supposed to look like, a power couple at the height of their trajectory. Inside, Ethan was performing. He shook hands. He smiled. He said the right things to the right people in the right sequence. And every time someone mentioned the Arenthian partnership, he said the same careful, rehearsed line about being excited for what the evening would bring. Marcus Chen found him at the bar at 8:15. "You holding up," Marcus said. "Fine," Ethan said. "She's not here yet," Marcus said. "I know. People are watching for her." He took a sip of his drink. "The whole room knows Ethan. Everyone knows who she is, and everyone knows she was your wife. So when she walks through that door, every single person in this room is going to be watching both of you." "I know that too," Ethan said. Marcus studied him. "What are you going to do?" "My job," Ethan said. At 8:47, the main doors opened. Later people who were there would describe it differently depending on who they were and where they stood. Some said they heard the shift before they saw it, a kind of collective exhale, a change in the air pressure of the room. Some said they noticed the security detail, first 4 men in dark suits entering in a precise formation, moving with the coordinated awareness of people who are responsible for something irreplaceable. And then Olivia walked in, midnight blue, diamonds, her dark hair pulled back with an architectural precision that framed her face completely. She moved through the doorway and into the room with the kind of bearing that cannot be taught, only inherited or forged over decades, or both. She did not hurry. She did not look around the room with the searching quality of someone who needs to locate themselves. She walked in as though the room had been arranged around her arrival, which, in a sense, it had. Every head turned. CEOs turned. Ambassadors turned. A Swiss banking executive who had not visibly reacted to anything in 30 years turned. 2 of the most powerful women in New York finance turned and then leaned toward each other and said something quietly. Ambassador Leclerc moved to her side immediately, and the deference in his posture, a man who was himself extraordinarily powerful, deferring to her, communicated something to the room that no introduction could have managed. Sophia felt it first. She had been mid-sentence with the wife of a hedge fund manager describing a property she was considering in the Hamptons, and she stopped. Just stopped. She turned to look at what everyone else was looking at. "Is that the hedge fund wife started?" "Yes," Sophia said. Her voice was very flat. Ethan had been across the room near the East Corridor speaking to Thomas Reeves about the 10 o'clock formal review schedule. He heard the shift in the room before he turned. He had been bracing for this moment for 3 days. He thought he was prepared. He turned around. He was not prepared. The woman who walked toward the center of that room wearing the diamonds that had belonged to her grandmother, his ex-wife, the woman he had told to be gone by Friday, the woman he had watched pick up the pieces of a vase he'd smashed on the kitchen floor, was the most commanding presence in a room full of the most commanding people in the financial world. And people were bowing their heads. Not deeply, not the full formal bow of a royal court, but that slight instinctive dip of the chin that the body does when it recognizes authority older than itself. The Swiss banker did it. A senior partner at the most powerful law firm in New York did it. The deputy ambassador of France did it. Ethan stood completely still. Sophia appeared at his elbow. "Don't stare," she said, her voice very quiet and very controlled. "I'm not staring," he said. "You are," she said, "and everyone can see you." He looked away. He looked at his drink. His hand, he noticed, was not entirely steady. The next 40 minutes were the longest of his professional life. The evening moved forward, speeches, introductions, the formal social choreography of an event like this, and through all of it, he was aware of Olivia, the way you're aware of a sound you can't stop hearing. She moved through the room with complete ease, speaking to people in what sounded like at least 3 languages, laughing at something the French ambassador said, placing her hand briefly on the arm of an elderly Swiss financier who responded to the touch with visible warmth. She did not look at Ethan, not once, not a glance, not a flicker of acknowledgement in his direction. He was in her navigation of the room, simply not there. And somehow that erasure that complete practiced invisibility she turned on him now after 6 years of him making her invisible was the most devastating thing that had happened to him all evening. Sophia tried twice to engineer a moment where they would have to acknowledge each other. She maneuvered them toward Olivia's orbit once at the pre-dinner reception and once near the formal introduction area. Both times, Olivia's path adjusted smoothly, naturally, with the ease of someone who has been managing rooms for her entire adult life, and the moment dissolved. "She's avoiding us," Sophia said during the first course of dinner. "She's working the room," Ethan said. "She's avoiding us and working the room at the same time." Sophia stabbed a piece of food with more force than necessary. "She's very good." He didn't answer. At 9:55, Thomas Reeves appeared at Ethan's elbow. "The formal partnership review is in 5 minutes. East drawing room." He paused. "Her Royal Highness's legal team is already there. You and I will represent Vanguard along with Richard." "Right," Ethan said. He set down his napkin. Sophia caught his arm as he stood. "Fix this," she said very quietly. "Not a request, an instruction." He looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her face, and he had a thought that came from somewhere he didn't control, that in 6 years of marriage, Olivia had never once given him an instruction disguised as encouragement. She had always simply trusted him to do what he said he would do, and when he failed, she had said, "Okay, Ethan," and turned back to whatever she was doing. He didn't know what to do with that thought either. He followed Thomas out of the dining hall. The East drawing room had been set for the formal review. A long table documents water the precise arrangement of a space where serious things happen. Olivia was already seated on one side, flanked by 2 members of her legal team, and Henri, who stood slightly behind her left shoulder, with his tablet and his perfect, infuriating composure. Richard Holt was already there, seated on the Vanguard side. He stood briefly when Olivia entered, a gesture of acknowledgement that was entirely appropriate, and that Ethan noted with a hollow sensation somewhere in his chest. Ethan sat down across from her, and for the first time since she had walked out the front door of their home, Olivia looked directly at him. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Her expression was professional, composed, neutral, the face of someone conducting business. But underneath it, in the very back of those eyes that he had never been able to fully read, there was something. Not anger. He had expected anger, and he could have handled anger. It was sadness. Old sadness, the kind that has already finished its worst work and settled into something quieter. The kind that looks at the person who caused it without hatred, because the energy for hatred was spent a long time ago. It hit him harder than anger would have. The legal review began. Olivia's lead counsel, a precise French woman named Madame Beaufort, moved through the documents with clinical efficiency. The partnership framework. the trust authorization, the sovereign representation clauses. Every page was reviewed, every clause was addressed. Then Madame Beaufort set down her pen and looked across the table. "There is the matter of the conflict of interest provision," she said, "specifically the misrepresentations made in the divorce filing regarding the trust representative's assets." Thomas Reeves began to speak. Madame Beaufort let him finish. Then she looked at Olivia. The room was completely still. Olivia looked at the documents in front of her. She was quiet for a moment, that particular quiet of hers, the deep water stillness. Then she looked up. "The Duchy of Arenthia," she said, "is prepared to waive the conflict provision." The exhale from the vanguard side of the table was nearly audible. "Conditionally," she added. The exhale stopped. "The conditions are as follows." She nodded to Madame Beaufort, who distributed a single-page document to each person at the table. "First, Vanguard Global will implement a new governance structure for the partnership with an independent ethics board that includes 2 Arenthian-appointed members. Second, 10% of the partnership's annual proceeds will be directed to a humanitarian fund jointly administered. Third," she paused, and her eyes moved briefly to Ethan and then away. "The internal legal review of the preliminary framework, misrepresentations, will be handled privately through diplomatic channels and will not be pursued in any public commercial or legal forum." Awesome. She was protecting him, even now, even after everything. She was giving him a way out that didn't include public destruction. He understood this. He sat across from her, and he understood it completely, and he felt something shift in his chest that he suspected was going to keep shifting for a very long time. "These conditions are acceptable," Richard Holt said immediately. Ethan looked at him. Richard did not look back. "We will need the final partnership documents reviewed by our legal team tonight," Madame Beaufort said. "Of course," Thomas said. "If the review is satisfactory," Olivia said, "I will sign at midnight." At midnight, in the East Drawing Room of the Grand Meridian Hotel, with Henri and Thomas Reeves as witnesses, Olivia Isabel Marguerite d'Arenthia signed the partnership documents that completed the most significant international financial deal in Vanguard Global's history. She signed with the same precise, unhurried signature she had used her entire life, the one she'd been taught as a child in a palace she had left behind to spend 7 years understanding the world without her title following her everywhere. The room congratulated itself in the way these rooms do. Hands were shaken, words were said. Richard Holt thanked her with the genuine, slightly stunned gratitude of a man who understands he just watched something save his company. She received it all with warmth and with grace. Ethan stood at the edge of the room. He had not been part of the signing. He had not been asked to contribute to the moment. He was in this room, at this table, on this night peripheral, a supporting character in a deal that had his name on it. As the room began to empty, as the legal teams gathered their documents, and Henri spoke quietly into his phone, and Richard moved toward the door, already composing the press statement in his head, Olivia stood and gathered her things. She would pass within 3 feet of Ethan on her way to the door. He knew it. She knew it. He stood his ground. He didn't move, didn't engineer a collision, just stood there in her path. And when she reached him, she stopped. Her team stopped behind her, giving the moment its space without being asked. They stood face to face for the first time in 3 weeks. "Thank you," he said, "for the conflict provision. You didn't have to do that." She looked at him. "No," she agreed, "I didn't." "Olivia," he started. "Your Highness," Henri said from behind her left shoulder, not aggressively, just a gentle, precise correction. Ethan stopped. Something moved across Olivia's face, something complicated and brief. Then she said very quietly, "Take care of yourself, Ethan." She walked past him. The door closed. He stood in the empty drawing room with the ghost of her perfume, something he now recognized as European formal old, and the distant sound of the party still running in the main hall. And he understood something with the particular clarity that only arrives after it is too late to be useful. He had spent 6 years married to someone extraordinary and had looked at her every day and seen nothing but what he expected to see. He had decided who she was before he'd ever really asked. He had taken the stillness for emptiness, the patience for passivity, the quiet for defeat. He had been wrong about every single thing. Back in the dining hall, Sophia was waiting. She saw his face when he came through the door, and she read it immediately the way she read everything fast and precise. "The deal is done," she said. "The deal is done," he said. And he looked at her. She signed, "Vanguard is safe." Sophia relaxed. She picked up her champagne. "Good," she said. "Crisis averted." She touched his arm lightly. "See? It all worked out." He looked at her hand on his arm again. He thought about the word "worked." He thought about what it meant for a thing to work when you measured it only by whether it held together. "Yes," he said. He picked up his own drink. He smiled the appropriate smile, but something behind his eyes had already gone somewhere else, somewhere quieter, somewhere that was going to be very difficult to come back from. Because in the East drawing room, across a table that represented everything he'd built, a woman he had dismissed and discarded had just saved his career, protected him from legal ruin, and walked away without asking for a single thing in return. And he was beginning to understand, with the devastating, irreversible clarity of a man who has seen something true for the first time, exactly what kind of person does something like that, and exactly what kind of person he had been in return. The morning after the gala, Ethan woke up before the alarm. He lay in the dark for a moment listening to Sophia breathing beside him, and the first thing he felt was not relief. He had expected relief. The deal was signed. Vanguard was safe. The crisis had resolved itself in the best possible way, given the circumstances. But what sat in his chest when he opened his eyes was something heavier than relief, something that didn't lift when he reminded himself that everything had worked out. He got up quietly. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen counter in the early morning gray, and he thought about the East drawing room and the moment when Olivia had looked at him across that table and the particular quality of sadness he had seen in her eyes before she put her professional face back on and moved forward. He thought about, "Take care of yourself, Ethan," the way she said it, not as a wish, not really, more like the last line of a letter you write when you've already sealed the envelope. He drank his coffee. He got dressed. He went to work. The Vanguard offices that morning had the particular charged atmosphere of an aftermath, people moving faster than usual, conversations happening in clusters, the specific energy of an institution that had come close to something bad and pulled back just in time. Patricia met him at the elevator with a summary of overnight communications, and her voice had some of its normal warmth back, which told him the temperature of the room. "Richard wants a 10 o'clock, she said. "I'll be there," he said. The 10 o'clock with Richard was brief and surprisingly warm. Richard shook his hand, said the word excellent 3 times, and told him that the partnership announcement had already generated significant press interest and that Vanguard stock had opened up 2 points. He spoke about Ethan's role in the deal with the generous rewriting of history that powerful men perform when outcomes are good, crediting the person in the room rather than the person who is actually responsible. Ethan sat through it. He said thank you. He smiled appropriately. Thomas Reeves caught him in the hallway afterward. "You should know," Thomas said quietly, walking alongside him, "that Madame Beaufort's team filed the formal waiver of the conflict provision this morning. It's done. Clean." "She really waived it," Ethan said. He hadn't entirely believed it until now. "Completely. No conditions attached beyond what was agreed at the table." Thomas paused. "Whatever you think of how things ended between you personally, Ethan, she handled this with extraordinary restraint." "I know," Ethan said. Thomas looked at him for a moment. "Do you?" he said. "Not unkindly, just precisely." Ethan didn't answer. Thomas nodded once and turned back toward his office, and Ethan stood in the corridor and let the question sit there because it deserved to sit there. He had done something wrong. Not just one thing, a sequence of things accumulated over years, each one small enough to rationalize individually and catastrophic in their sum. He was beginning finally to see the full shape of it. The question was what you did with that kind of seeing. Sophia answered that question for him 2 days later, and the answer was not the one he had expected. She had been at a lunch with Catherine Mercer and 2 other women from their social circle, the kind of lunch that lasts 3 hours and covers everything that matters, in a world whose currency is reputation and connection. She came home that afternoon with her coat on, and her bag still on her shoulder, which meant she hadn't stopped to put things down, which meant she had come home with a purpose. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up from his laptop. "Okay." She sat across from him. She did not take her coat off. That was the detail he noticed, the coat staying on like she was keeping the option of leaving open. "Catherine's husband is on the Vanguard board," she said. "I know that." He told Catherine something this morning that Catherine told me at lunch. She paused. Not for effect, Sophia didn't do things for effect when she was being serious. She paused because she was organizing the information in the most useful sequence. The board had a meeting last week, before the gala. They discussed the legal exposure created by your divorce filing. Thomas told me about the legal review, Ethan said. They also discussed you, she said, specifically whether your judgment, your personal judgment, had created unacceptable risk for the company, and whether someone in your position, having failed to understand the identity of his own wife for 6 years, was the right person to be managing international partnerships going forward. The room was very quiet. They're going to restructure your role, Sophia said. Not fire you. Restructure. Move you to a domestic portfolio. Take the international division off your plate. She held his gaze. It'll look like a lateral move. Internally, everyone will know what it is. Ethan sat back. He felt the specific sensation of ground giving way beneath a structure that had looked solid the way it doesn't happen all at once, but in stages, each one making the next inevitable. When, he said. Catherine thinks within the month. He nodded slowly. He looked at his hands on the table. He thought about Richard Holt saying excellent 3 times that morning with that warm, careful smile, and he understood now what that warmth had been covering. Ethan. Sophia's voice had changed. Still precise, but underneath the precision, there was something that was either honesty or the closest thing to it she could manage. I need to ask you something. Ask, he said. Is this going to keep getting worse? He looked at her. Because I have been watching this situation for 3 weeks, she said, and every time I think the floor is solid, there's another level underneath it. The divorce filing, the legal exposure, the board review, and She stopped, collected herself. She keeps being better than this, than us, than what we did. She said it without flinching, which was the most honest thing he had ever heard from her. And I need to know if you have a plan to stabilize this or if I'm standing on something that's still falling. He looked at her for a long time. I don't know, he said. And for the second time in a month, it was the most honest thing he'd said. Sophia's face did something complicated. Then she stood up. She still had her coat on. She picked up her bag. I'm going to stay at my place tonight, she said. I need to think. Okay, he said. She left. The door closed. He sat in the silence of the apartment that had been his home for 6 years, and then his alone, and now felt like neither, and he didn't move for a long time. The board's restructuring announcement came 11 days after the gala, exactly as Catherine Mercer had described it. A memo, clean language, new responsibilities, streamlined focus, better alignment with Ethan's core strengths. Every word was engineered to be both technically accurate and perfectly clear to anyone who knew how to read between them. Ethan read the memo in Richard's office, sitting across from the man who had shaken his hand and said excellent 3 times, and who was now looking at him with something that was professional warmth and nothing else. The domestic portfolio is significant, Richard said. You'll have real impact. I know, Ethan said. This isn't punitive, Richard said. I know, Ethan said again. He handed the memo back. He stood up. He shook Richard's hand because that was what you did. He walked back to his office and closed the door and stood at his window, the same window where he'd stood the morning he read the Arenthian embassy document and started to understand what he'd done, and he looked out at the city and felt the altered dimensions of his own life settling around him. His phone buzzed. Sophia. He looked at the message. It was 4 words. We should talk tonight. He knew what tonight would be. He had known since she'd walked out with her coat still on. Sophia Vance was many things, but she was not someone who stayed on a ship once she'd calculated the waterline. She had invested in Ethan Blake's trajectory, and the trajectory had changed, and she was going to manage her exposure with the same clean efficiency she applied to everything else. He almost admired it. He typed back, I'll be home at 7. He set the phone down. He turned from the window, and his desk phone rang. Patricia's voice. There's a call for you on line 2, from the Arenthian embassy. He stopped. Who? They said it's from Henri Devereaux, Her Royal Highness's personal aide. He crossed to his desk. He picked up the phone. This is Ethan Blake. Mr. Blake. Henri's voice was exactly as he remembered it. Belgian precision, impeccable politeness underneath it, and absolute confidence in the position he served. I hope I'm not interrupting. You're not. What can I do for you? A brief pause. Her Royal Highness asked me to pass along a message. She wanted you to know that the Orenthian Trust's Investment Committee has reviewed the partnership governance structure and is fully satisfied with the agreed framework. She anticipates a productive and professionally smooth relationship with Vanguard going forward. Ethan frowned slightly. I thank you. Please tell her I'm glad to hear that. Of course. Another pause, this one a beat longer, and Ethan had the distinct sense that Henri was deciding something. She also asked me to return something to you. A small item that was inadvertently left behind when she departed your home. Left behind, Ethan said. I don't what item? A fragment of ceramic, Henri said. Blue with a painted edge. She said you would know what it was. The piece of the vase. The piece he'd found under the cabinet and picked up and set on the counter and looked at in the quiet of a night when he was beginning to understand what he had broken. The piece he hadn't thrown away. She kept it, he said. She gave it to her security team the morning she left. Henri said simply, she wanted it returned to you. Ethan sat down slowly. Why? He said. He knew it wasn't a professional question. He asked it anyway. Henri was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, and I'm quoting directly, Mr. Blake, she said that broken things should go back to the person responsible for breaking them, so they don't forget. The line was silent. I see, Ethan said. His voice was completely steady. He was very good at that, at holding himself steady when things moved beneath him. He had built a career on it. Tell her. He stopped, started again. Tell her I understand. I will, Mr. Blake, Henri said. Good afternoon. The call ended. Ethan sat at his desk with the phone in his hand for a long time. Long enough that Patricia knocked on his door and he told her through it that he needed 30 minutes, please no interruptions. Broken things should go back to the person responsible for breaking them, so they don't forget. He set the phone down. He put his elbows on his desk and his face in his hands, and he sat with it, all of it, the full accumulated weight of choices he had made, and things he had said, and a vase he had smashed on the floor, while a woman he did not understand stood there with her hands at her sides and her eyes steady, and did not flinch, did not beg, did not make him feel the size of what he was doing. She had never made him feel the size of what he was doing. She had just watched and waited. And then she had walked away with 6 years of carefully held knowledge and done exactly what she'd always done, handled it with more dignity than he deserved. The ceramic fragment arrived by courier that afternoon. A small box wrapped in embassy paper, his name written on it in Henri's precise hand. He opened it alone in his office. The piece was smaller than he remembered. Pale blue with that delicate painted edge, part of a pattern he now realized was not decorative, but heraldic. A detail from the Orenthian crest he understood now. She had been carrying a piece of her homeland with her every day, and he had smashed it on the floor without a second thought, because he was angry and she was in the way. He set the piece on his desk in the center, where he would see it every morning. Then he went home. Sophia was there at 7 as arranged, and she had not brought anything extra with her and had not removed anything that was hers, which told him the conversation was going to happen in a specific way. She was composed entirely, completely composed, and she sat across from him at the kitchen table and folded her hands and said, I've been thinking. So have I, he said. I think we want different things, she said. I think we got here because we both wanted the same thing for a while and now we don't. And I think the honest thing, the actually honest thing, is to acknowledge that. He looked at her. What do you want Sophia actually want? She met his gaze. I want someone who is ascending, she said. It was brutal in its honesty, and he respected that about her even now. I want someone whose trajectory is up. That's what I'm built for, Ethan. It's what I know how to be part of. And right now, your trajectory, she spread her hands briefly, is not that, he said. Is not that, she agreed. He nodded slowly. He thought about the emerald dress and the champagne and the way she had said we're going to own that room with the total confidence of a person who has never questioned whether they deserve to own rooms. He thought about the morning she'd stood in the doorway laughing while he threw Olivia's vase on the floor. He thought about two very different women and the very different things they had shown him about who he was. You're right, he said. We do want different things. Sophia stood. She smoothed her jacket. I think it's better this way, she said. Clean. Clean, he agreed. She left, and that was that. No ceremony, no devastation, no permanent damage, just a clean exit by a woman who had always been clear about her terms. He sat in the kitchen alone and felt something that was not heartbreak. It was something quieter and stranger, a kind of recognition. He had chosen Sophia because she represented the life he thought he deserved, the version of himself he was building toward. And she had left him because his trajectory changed. And somehow, that made everything exactly as honest as it had always secretly been. 3 weeks after the gala, the first news profile appeared. It ran in an international financial publication, a long-form piece on the Arenthian partnership and the broader story of the duchy's sovereign wealth structure. It profiled Her Royal Highness extensively. It mentioned briefly and without particular emphasis that she had recently finalized a divorce from an American finance executive. The piece did not name Ethan. It didn't need to. Anyone who knew anything could connect the timeline. The piece was widely read. It was forwarded. It was discussed at exactly the kinds of lunches and dinners and club meetings where Ethan's name used to be said with a particular kind of admiring weight. Now, when his name came up, there was a pause before it. A slight, barely perceptible recalibration, the kind that happens when a person's story has been permanently altered by the emergence of a fact that recontextualizes everything. He felt it at a dinner 3 weeks after the publication hosted by a banking executive whose guest list included several people Ethan had known for years. The conversation was warm enough, professional enough, but there were two brief, specific moments where someone started a sentence that was heading toward Ethan's name and then redirected, and the redirection told him more than any direct conversation would have. He was no longer the story people told about Rising. He was the story people told about the man who had the Grand Duchess in his kitchen for 6 years and called her an embarrassment. He drove home from that dinner at 11:30 and sat in the parking structure beneath his building for 10 minutes before going inside. He sat in the dark and the quiet, and he did the accounting he had been avoiding for weeks, the full, honest, bottom-of-the-ledger accounting. Career diminished. Not destroyed, but diminished in ways that would compound over time. Reputation altered. The kind of alteration that doesn't reverse. Sophia gone. Cleanly, correctly, and without much grief on either side, which told its own story. Olivia signing documents in an embassy residence and preparing to return to Arenthia, to a life and a title and a responsibility that she had set aside for 7 years, partly to understand the world, and partly he believed this now in the way he had come to believe uncomfortable truths, partly because she had hoped for him to be someone he had declined to be. He went inside. He went to his desk. The ceramic fragment was there exactly where he'd placed it, center of the desk, visible from his chair, impossible to ignore. He sat and he looked at it for a while. Then he opened his laptop and he began to type. Not an email, not a professional communication, something he had never done before. A letter. The kind of letter people write when they have run out of useful things to do and have not run out of necessary things to say. He didn't know if he would send it. He didn't write it for an outcome. He wrote it the way you write things when you finally need to tell the truth to someone, even if the someone is partially yourself. He wrote, I didn't know who you were, but I think what I'm most ashamed of isn't that. I think what I'm most ashamed of is that I didn't try to find out. I looked at you every day for 6 years, and I saw what I expected to see, and I never asked a single question that might have shown me something more. That is not a mistake I made because I was busy or distracted. It is a mistake I made because I had already decided. And the person I decided you were was a reflection of what I needed you to be, not who you actually were. I understand that now. I'm not sure what to do with it, but I understand it. He stopped typing. He read what he had written. He closed the laptop. He was not going to send it. Not because it wasn't true, it was the truest thing he had written in years, but because some letters are written for the writer, not the reader. And because Olivia had already given him more than he deserved, the waiver, the protection from the legal framework, the ceramic fragment sent back without cruelty, just the clean weight of accountability. And she did not need his self-reckoning delivered to her door like one more thing to handle with grace. She had handled enough. He went to bed. He lay in the dark. And for the first time since October, he stopped trying to solve the thing. He just let it be what it was, a man alone in his apartment with a career that had contracted and a relationship that had evaporated and a small piece of painted ceramic on his desk that would sit there every morning until he either moved it or stopped needing it. He suspected it would be there for a while. 2 days later, the embassy issued a formal announcement. Her Royal Highness, Olivia Isabel Marguerite de Arenthia, would be departing New York on the 15th of December to return to Arenthia for her formal investiture ceremony. The ceremony would mark her official assumption of the Grand Duchy's sovereign responsibilities. It would be broadcast internationally. Ethan read the announcement on his phone standing in line for coffee at the place near the Vanguard building that he'd gone to every morning for years. The person in front of him ordered something complicated. The barista wrote a name on a cup. The city moved outside the window with its complete and magnificent indifference to any individual story. He read the announcement. He put his phone in his pocket. He ordered his coffee. He thought she made it. She actually made it all the way back. He thought about the morning she'd stood in front of him on the steps of their townhouse in October and said goodbye with the perfect composure of someone who had already been saying goodbye for a long time before they said the word. He thought about Henri's voice on the phone. Broken things should go back to the person responsible for breaking them. He picked up his coffee. He went to work. He sat down at his desk and looked at the ceramic piece and then opened his laptop and started his day. Because that is what you do. You start the day, even when the day begins in a smaller life than the one you thought you were building. And somewhere across the Atlantic or preparing to cross it, a woman who had been invisible by choice and diminished by someone else's failure of imagination was going home. Going home to a title and a responsibility and a life she had earned twice, once by birthright and once by surviving 6 years of being looked at and not seen, and walking away from it with her dignity not just intact but clarified. She was going home. And Ethan Blake was going to sit at his desk every day and look at a piece of blue ceramic and know in the way that only real reckoning feels, not comfortable, not clean, but true, exactly what it had cost him. Not a wife, a kingdom, and the man he could have been if he had ever once thought to ask. The 15th of December came in cold and clear, the kind of day that has no softness in it, just light and air and the particular honesty of winter. Ethan did not watch the departure announcement. He had made that decision early, not out of indifference, but out of the opposite. He understood with the clarity that had been building in him for weeks that some things you do not get to witness. You forfeit the right to certain moments when you make certain choices. The departure of Olivia Isabel Marguerite de Arenthia from John F. Kennedy International Airport was one of those moments. It was not his to watch. He went to work instead. He sat at his desk. He opened his laptop. The ceramic fragment was where it always was, center of the desk, pale blue, the painted heraldic edge catching the morning light. Patricia knocked at 9. "The quarterly review documents are ready whenever you are." "Give me 10 minutes," he said. She left. He sat for those 10 minutes, and he let himself think about her, not with the desperate, grasping quality of regret, but with something quieter. He let himself think about 6 years, and all the mornings she had made coffee, and all the dinners where he had looked past her at the version of his life he thought he was building, and the way she had sat with all of it, patient and watchful, and extraordinarily privately herself. He let himself feel the full weight of it. Then he picked up the quarterly review documents, and he went to work because that was the only honest thing left to do. Across the Atlantic, the preparations for the investiture ceremony had been underway for 2 months. The ceremony was scheduled for the 28th of December, giving Olivia nearly 2 weeks upon her return to complete the formal protocols, the legal registrations, the governmental briefings, the 100 specific requirements of officially becoming what she had always been born to be. Henri managed the schedule with the focused intensity of a man who understood that this moment was the culmination of everything he had worked toward for 31 years. He had watched this woman grow from a child in the palace corridors to a graduate student in New York, to a woman who had lived quietly and observed everything and come back carrying a knowledge of the world that no education alone could have given her. He had watched her be diminished. He had watched her be patient. He had watched her sign those partnership documents at midnight with the same hand that had signed her first official royal correspondence at age 16. And he had thought in that moment that he had never seen anything more precisely itself than her. On the morning of her return to Arenthia, the palace staff lined the main corridor. It was not required, it was not in any protocol. They did it because they wanted to, because some arrivals deserved to be witnessed. When Olivia walked through the doors of the palace she had left 7 years earlier, she stopped. She looked at the faces lining the corridor. Familiar faces, people who had known her since childhood, people who had maintained things in her absence with the specific faithfulness of people who believe in what they're maintaining. She didn't cry. She pressed her lips together once briefly, and her eyes were very bright. Then she straightened, and she walked the corridor the way she walked every room, with that particular bearing that cannot be taught, only carried, and she greeted each person by name because she had never forgotten a single one. Henri, walking beside her, did not cry either. He had been doing this job for 31 years, and he had maintained his composure through an extraordinary range of human events. But he blinked once and looked at the ceiling briefly, and then composed himself and consulted his tablet. "Welcome home, Your Highness," he said. "It's good to be back, Henri," she said. And that was all because some things don't need more than that. Back in New York, the days settled into their new shape around Ethan. The domestic portfolio was not nothing. He told himself this, and it was true. He worked hard. He was competent. He came in early and left late and did the job with the seriousness it deserved. But the office felt different in a way he couldn't articulate to anyone because there was no one he could have articulated it to. The geography was the same. The work was real. But something in the atmosphere of the place had changed in relation to him, and he felt it every day in ways too small to name and too consistent to ignore. Marcus Chen had lunch with him on the 19th of December, 4 days after Olivia's departure. They went to the usual place, the club, the same table. Marcus ordered what he always ordered. Ethan did the same. "How are you doing?" Marcus said. And he meant it not as a pleasantry, but as a real question, the kind that old friends ask when they've been watching something difficult from close range and have waited for the right moment. Ethan considered the question seriously. "I'm figuring out what I'm actually good at," he said, "and what I thought I was good at." Marcus nodded. He turned his glass slowly. "Those two things being different." "More different than I knew," Ethan said. "And Sophia, done, cleanly." "I heard," Marcus said. He didn't add anything to it, which was the correct response. They ate for a moment in the particular comfortable silence of men who have known each other long enough that silence doesn't need to be filled. "Do you regret it?" Marcus said. "All of it." Ethan looked at him. "Every day," he said, "but not the way I expected to. I thought regret would feel like wanting things back. It doesn't. It feels like understanding what you did clearly enough that you can't unknow it, and having to figure out who you are on the other side of that." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's more self-awareness than I've heard from you in 20 years of friendship." 20 years of being wrong about things will do that," Ethan said. Marcus almost smiled. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet," Ethan said. "But I'm going to do something. Something real." He meant it. He wasn't sure what it looked like yet, but he meant it with a seriousness that surprised even him. The investiture ceremony of Her Royal Highness, Olivia Isabel Marguerite d'Arenthia, was broadcast on the 28th of December on 3 international news networks and live-streamed globally through the official Arenthian government channel. It was covered by outlets from 17 countries. The coverage was extensive, warm, and carried the particular quality of a story that people responded to instinctively: a woman returning to her rightful place, assuming a responsibility she had earned twice over. Ethan watched it alone in his apartment on the evening of the 28th. He had decided to watch it after all. He had reversed his earlier decision sometime in the 3rd week of December in the quiet of a Tuesday night, and he hadn't questioned the reversal. He just let it be what it was. He sat on the couch with the television on, and he watched. She wore the formal Arenthian ceremonial white, not the midnight blue of the gala, not the quiet cardigan of the kitchen, but the white of the royal house, the color of the title she was formally assuming. The diamond crest necklace was there, her grandmother's piece, and it looked different in this context, not like jewelry, but like what it actually was, which was history worn close to the body. The ceremony was solemn and precise and extraordinarily moving in the way that old things conducted with full sincerity are always moving. The Archbishop of the Duchy read the formal oath. Olivia repeated it in 3 languages, Arenthian, French, and English, with perfect clarity and no hesitation whatsoever. When the crown, a small, elegant circlet, not theatrical but ancient, was placed on her head, Ethan pressed his hand flat against his leg and held it there. He watched her face during that moment. She was composed. She was present. And there was something in her expression that he recognized, that deep-water stillness, that quality of being completely inhabitably herself. And he understood, watching it on a screen from across the Atlantic, that he had always been looking at something extraordinary and had chosen repeatedly and deliberately to see something ordinary instead. The cameras captured her walking through the ceremonial hall afterward, greeting dignitaries, speaking, laughing at something an elderly ambassador said. She was radiant in the way that people are radiant when they are exactly where they belong, doing exactly what they were built to do, carrying exactly what they were built to carry. He turned the television off when the ceremony ended. He sat in the quiet. He looked across the room at his desk, where the ceramic fragment caught the light from the window. He thought about everything he had built, and everything he had broken, and the specific irreversible difference between the two. Then something unexpected happened, something he had not anticipated, and that hit him with the force of things that are completely true. He felt underneath all of it, underneath the regret and the accounting and the clear-eyed recognition of his own failures, a small and genuine thing that was not entirely grief. He felt something close to gratitude. Not for what he'd lost. He was not confused enough about the nature of loss to be grateful for it, but for what he could see now that he couldn't see before. For the fact that the ceiling he had been pressing up against for years, that invisible limit of his own smallness, his own incuriosity, his own willingness to assign people their value before he knew them, had finally been named, had finally been made visible, had finally been broken open by the departure of a woman who had been showing him quietly and without drama exactly who she was for 6 years, and whose departure had left him no choice but to see it. Some people go their entire lives without that particular break, without the thing that cracks them open enough to let in a different quality of light. He was 38 years old. He had a career that was diminished but real. He had a desk with a piece of ceramic on it that he looked at every morning. He had 20 years of friendship with a man who asked real questions and waited for real answers. He had for the first time a clear and undiluted view of himself. It was uncomfortable. It was not pleasant. It was the most valuable thing he owned. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. "It's late," Marcus said when he answered. Not complaining, just noting. "I watched the ceremony," Ethan said. A pause. "How was it?" "She was extraordinary," Ethan said. "She looked herself, completely herself, like she was always heading there and now she's there." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I think so," Ethan said. "I think I'm going to be." He paused. "I want to do something different, at work. I've been thinking about it for weeks. There's a mentorship program, Young Analysts First Generation No Network. I've been asked to lead it twice, and I've declined twice because it wasn't the right visibility." "And now," Marcus said. "Now I'm going to say yes," Ethan said, "because it's the right thing to do, and because I need to do something that's the right thing to do." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good," he said. Simply, just good. They talked for a while longer, and when Ethan hung up, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, not relief, but the specific quiet of a person who has stopped running from a reckoning and started living inside it. In Arenthia, the celebration following the investiture had moved from the ceremonial hall to the palace's formal dining room, where the evening had taken on the warmth of something genuinely festive. Olivia moved through it with the ease of someone who had returned fully to themselves, greeting, laughing, accepting congratulations with the warmth that she had always had, the warmth that Ethan had never bothered to look for, because he was too busy deciding she didn't have it. Late in the evening, when the formal portion was winding down and the smaller conversations had begun, Henri appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. She took one. He kept one, which was unusual. Henri was not generally a man who accepted champagne at official functions. She noticed. "Are we celebrating something specific, Henri?" "We're celebrating the end of something very long," he said, "and the beginning of something better." She clinked her glass against his. "I'll drink to that." They stood for a moment in the companionable quiet of people who have been through something difficult together and arrived somewhere worth arriving. "Do you think about it?" Henri said. "New York, the situation." She considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. "Sometimes," she said. "Not with anger. I did for a while. But anger is expensive, and I have things to do with my energy." She took a sip. "I think about what I learned, 7 years in New York taught me things I couldn't have learned here, about how the world works when it doesn't know who you are, about what people show you when they think you have nothing." She paused. "About what I actually want the duchy to be, what I want to build." "And what do you want to build?" Henri said. She looked around the room at the faces, the history, the living continuity of something that had survived for centuries. "Something that lasts," she said. "Something that matters because it's good, not just because it's old." She set her glass down. "I want to build something Arenthia will be proud of in 100 years, and I know how to do it now in a way I didn't before I left." Henri nodded. He set his own glass down. "Then we had better get to work," he said. She smiled a real smile, full and unguarded, the kind she had kept mostly to herself for years. "We had better," she agreed. The months that followed moved with the specific momentum of a life that has found its proper direction and is now simply traveling in it. Olivia's first year as Grand Duchess was covered extensively by international media, not because of the drama of her reinstatement, but because of what she was actually doing with it. The humanitarian fund established through the Vanguard Partnership was operational within 4 months, supporting education and medical infrastructure in 3 underserved regions. She reformed the duchy's investment governance structure, instituting transparency standards that became a referenced model in European financial circles. She established a program for young women from non-elite backgrounds to train in international finance and diplomacy, and she funded it personally. She was, by every measure, exactly what she had always been, just visible now. The coverage was global. The profiles were extensive. The photographs showed a woman doing the work, not performing it, not presenting it, but actually doing it with the focused, unhurried seriousness of someone who has known exactly what they were built for and has simply been waiting for the right moment to do it fully. One evening in March, in a warehouse on the outskirts of Queens, Ethan Blake was loading inventory onto a sorting belt for the 4th hour of a 6-hour shift. He had taken the warehouse job 3 weeks earlier, not out of financial necessity, his Vanguard salary diminished, but real covered his needs, but out of something harder to explain. A need to do work with his hands. A need to be somewhere that had no connection to the world he had built and lost and was trying to understand. He told no one at Vanguard. He told Marcus, who said nothing for a moment, and then said quietly that he thought it was probably the healthiest thing Ethan had done in years. He had been leading the analyst mentorship program for 2 months. He was good at it in a way that surprised him, patient with the young analysts, in a way he had never been patient with anyone genuinely interested in their paths, their obstacles, their questions. He brought to it the specific knowledge of a man who had succeeded for the wrong reasons and failed for the right ones, and the young analysts who were sharp and quick and had no patience for performance responded to his honesty with their own. One of them, a 24-year-old named Davia First Generation Sharp, as anything from a family that had never had anyone on Wall Street, had asked him in their 3rd session, "What's the most important thing you know about this business that nobody tells you?" He had thought about it seriously. Then he said that the most dangerous thing in any room is a person who has already decided what they know. The person who is still asking questions will always eventually outrun the person who stopped. Davia had written it down. He had watched her write it and felt something that was complicated and real and not entirely comfortable, because the answer was also about him, and she didn't know that, and the not knowing was part of what made it matter. He was still at his desk with the ceramic fragment. He had not moved it. He had looked at it every morning for 4 months, and he intended to keep looking at it for as long as it took for the looking to become something he didn't need anymore. He wasn't there yet. He was honest enough to know that. On the evening he saw her on television, not live, not planned, but turning on the news, and finding her there being interviewed by a French journalist about the duchy's new humanitarian frameworks, he sat down on the couch and watched the whole segment without moving. She spoke with the composed authority of someone who has thought deeply about what she believes and has no anxiety about saying it clearly. She spoke about responsibility and about what wealth is actually for and about the specific kind of courage required to build things that outlast you. She was warm and specific and occasionally funny in that dry, precise way he remembered from 6 years of mornings that he had not paid enough attention to. The journalist asked her near the end of the segment whether she had advice for young women who felt overlooked in professional environments. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Keep being exactly who you are. Don't make yourself smaller because someone else needs the room. The people who matter, the people worth being around, will always eventually recognize what's real, and the people who don't recognize it are telling you something important about themselves, not about you. The journalist nodded. The segment moved on. Ethan sat with the television still on and let those words move through him. Keep being exactly who you are. She had been exactly who she was for 6 years in his presence, and he had looked at her every day and asked her to be smaller, quieter, less. He had needed the room and she had given it to him, and he had called it her failure to grow. He turned off the television. He went to his desk. He sat down and he looked at the ceramic piece for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and he opened a notebook, a physical notebook, the kind you write in with your hand, and he started writing. Not a letter this time. Something more like a reckoning. The full accounting. Every specific moment he could recall where he had looked at her and chosen not to see. Every dinner. Every conversation. Every morning she had made coffee, and every evening he had looked past her at the life he was building that he thought she didn't fit into. He wrote for 2 hours. He filled 11 pages. When he was done, he closed the notebook. He set it on the desk beside the ceramic piece. He sat in the silence of his apartment, and he felt with complete clarity exactly the size and shape of what he had done and who he had been and where that left him. It left him here, in this apartment, with this job, with these 2 objects on his desk, a fragment of something he had broken, and 11 pages of honest accounting. With a mentorship program he was pouring himself into, and a warehouse job he went to on Thursday evenings because the physical work kept something in him grounded. With Marcus, who was a real friend, and with a clear and undiluted view of himself that he had not had before, and that he was not willing to surrender again. It was not the life he had planned. It was considerably smaller than the life he had planned measured in the currency he had always used. Measured differently, it was the most real his life had ever been. In the spring, 6 months after the investiture, Olivia Isabel Marguerite d'Arenthia sat at her desk in the palace's working wing, not the formal ceremonial rooms, but the actual working space where the actual business of the duchy was conducted, and reviewed the preliminary report on the humanitarian fund's first quarter outcomes. The numbers were significant. The education program had enrolled 412 young women across 3 regions. The Medical Infrastructure Initiative had broken ground in 2 communities that had been waiting for it for a decade. She set the report down. She looked out the window for a moment at the Arenthian sky, which was doing what it always did in spring, going from gray to that particular clear blue that had no equivalent anywhere she had ever traveled. Henri knocked and entered. "The European Finance Ministers' Conference has confirmed your keynote address for June," he said, "and the American investment delegation has formally requested a meeting in September." "Accept both," she said. "Of course." He made notes. "There's also a personal letter. It arrived this morning through the embassy's formal post, not the official channel." He set it on her desk. "It has your name on it, your full name, the formal one." She looked at the envelope. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She had seen it on documents for 6 years. She looked at it for a moment without touching it. "Should I?" Henri started. "Leave it," she said. "I'll read it when I'm ready." Henri nodded and left. She sat with the letter for most of the morning. She answered correspondence. She reviewed documents. She took a call with the finance minister's office. She did her work, which was what she always did. She did the work first completely, and then she attended to the personal things. In the late afternoon, she opened the letter. It was not long. 4 paragraphs handwritten in the careful script of someone who had rewritten it several times. It said what she expected it to say, and it said it with a plainness and a lack of self-justification that surprised her. There was no request in it, no ask for forgiveness, no suggestion that anything might be different. It simply said clearly and completely, "I understand what I did. I understand what it cost. I am trying to become someone who would have made different choices. And I think I owe you the honesty of saying so directly rather than carrying it in silence." She read it twice. She set it down. She sat for a moment in the late afternoon light of the working room where the Grand Duchesses of Arenthia had been sitting for 200 years, doing the work that needed to be done with the knowledge and the character they had been given to do it with. She picked up a pen. She wrote 4 sentences on a piece of the duchy's formal correspondence paper. She put it in an envelope. She wrote his name on it. Just his name, no title, no formality, because that was exactly the right amount. She gave it to Henri to post. It arrived at Ethan Blake's apartment 11 days later. He was home when it came. He held the envelope for a moment, the heavy cream paper, the formal Arenthian insignia on the back, and then he opened it. 4 sentences, her handwriting, which he also recognized immediately. She wrote, "I know. Thank you for saying it. I hope you become who you're trying to become. Take care of yourself, Ethan, and this time mean it." He read it standing in his hallway. He read it again. He walked to his desk. He set the letter down next to the ceramic fragment. He stood there looking at those 2 objects, the broken piece she had sent back, to remind him the 4 sentences she had sent to close something. And he felt the full weight of a story that had been told about who he was and who he wasn't, and what he had thrown away without understanding what he was throwing. He felt it completely. And then he straightened. He took a breath. He picked up the ceramic fragment, and he held it in his hand one last time, and then he placed it carefully, not in a drawer, not in a box, but on the small shelf above his desk, where he kept the things that mattered to him, between a photograph of his father and the first deal memo he had ever written 20 years ago when he was nobody and everything was still possible. He was nobody again in certain ways, and everything was in certain ways still possible. He sat down at his desk. He opened his laptop. He had 11 young analysts waiting for feedback on their quarterly presentations, and he had promised to have his notes to them by morning, and he was a man who was learning slowly, honestly, with no shortcuts to keep his promises. He got to work. Because some people spend their entire lives being who they thought they should be, and never once ask who they actually are. And some people, the ones who are broken open at exactly the right moment, by exactly the right loss, find out in time to do something real with the answer. Ethan Blake was going to be that kind of person, or he was going to spend the rest of his life trying. Either way, he was going to mean it.